Welcome to the Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery, where every death had a life and every life had a story. My name is Jenny Johnson.
Hello, and I'm Diane Hartshorn.
And we are back after a short little hiatus over
Yep.
Thanksgiving.
Mhm.
But I think you and I both needed that break.
Yes, because when you mentioned something about we've been going since August, and I stopped to think for a minute. I go, honey, I think we've been going since January. But one thing
Well,
or another.
yeah, true. But like it got hardcore in August when we were getting ready
Yes.
for all of our Beyond the Grave events and then all the theater stuff I do
Yep,
and you
exactly.
took up more work at the cemetery and it's just been like boom, 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 boom. And then when you had gotten back so late from your trip, which I'll talk about in just a second, and you were texting me about that, I was like, you know what? I think if we skip this week, it's okay. And I appreciate all of our listeners who wished us happy Thanksgiving on
Yes.
social media. And we're totally okay with missing an episode last week. We hope everybody enjoyed their time off or their families or whatever it was you chose to do
Mhm.
on Thursday last week. I cooked all day. And then when we were done eating, I told Dave, okay, my quota for the year is met and he can go back to being the one that cooks for our family now. So
Once a year, but usually Thanksgiving cooking, even though you make it
exactly.
once a year, it's like, you know, it's more than just a day of prep. So yeah.
Well, and I did, well, with the exception of the gravy, that was a from a package, but everything else was from scratch. And Dave did do the turkey. I will give him props for that. He fried the turkey for us, but I did the pies and I did all the other things that had to go in the oven or on top of the stove. That was all me. Peeled potatoes. Actually, Charlie helped peel potatoes too, so that was good. And all of that. But yeah, I'm not the world's biggest fan of hanging out in the kitchen and I don't do a lot of cooking. I can cook, I just don't do a lot of cooking. So Dave has always said if it weren't for him cooking, we would starve. And he's probably right. Or we'd spend way more money on takeout just because I don't like being in the kitchen.
Well, I mean, I messed up the world's easiest dish. I messed up green bean casserole. I don't know how. And then I really don't know how. But I did. I excelled at messing it up this year.
That's okay. My mashed potatoes weren't as creamy as I would have liked. I felt like they were drier. And that was, I mean, I put a bunch of milk and butter in them, but they still, I don't know. But everybody ate. So I won't
Right.
complain. And there was plenty of leftovers. And they, sent things home with the adult kids. I was like, here, take them now. I got to pass that honor on this year,
That's cool. That's really nice.
which was fun. So speaking of your trip, you got to do something you have been, I don't want to say dying to do. That's the wrong thing to say on this podcast, but you've
Oh
been
no,
wanting to do for like your whole life. Or
basic, yep.
yeah. So where
Basically,
did you just go?
well, I went to Kansas City, Missouri with my daughter Angela. She did another oddity show. So we went, and which was great. But for me, the highlight of the trip was Friday. Yes, Friday when we got there, or the day after we got there. We went to Kearney, Nebraska, and got Nebraska. Geez,
Well,
I think
Kearney is in Nebraska, but
Kearney, Missouri,
other
and
Kearney.
visited the Jesse James farm. So I got to be at the house where Jesse James grew up. And well, I mean, it was just amazing. We spent 5 hours there. We were basically had the place to ourselves.
Oh,
We had
that's
the
amazing.
best, the volunteer people, or I don't know if they were all volunteers, but the tour guides were amazing. And then on the way back, our Uber driver, which people in Missouri are very, very, very friendly, and the Uber drivers like to chat. Sometimes you get Uber drivers and they don't
I
say a bloody word to
love a
you.
good Uber driver like that. When
So
they
we were
become your
talking,
tour guide.
yeah. So we were talking about, oh yeah, we didn't get to stop at the cemetery on the way because an Uber driver. He goes, well, where is it? We'll stop. So on the way back, we pulled into the cemetery. It's a very small cemetery, and we found this little sign. I don't even think it might have been like 8.5 by 11, little green sign. It said Jesse James grave, and that was it. And so we went and saw where he's buried, and his wife, and his mother, and his brother. And it was like, it's still surreal to think that this is something I wanted to do for as long as I can remember and to finally be there. And like the total geek that I am, I walked into the gift store and I just started crying. And
Oh,
my daughter, my Angela's behind me and she had this funny little grin on her face. And she sort of had to explain to them why I'm like losing my mind, but it was really cool. So
oh, I'm so glad you got to do that. And right at
yeah,
Thanksgiving, like what a great time to go and do that right around the holiday when it's
yeah,
not, because I'm betting in the summer they're probably busier. There's
and
probably more
humid.
people
Yeah.
visiting. Yeah, and definitely more humid than
And
it
it's
would
still
be this
surrounded
time of
by
year.
farm, which was so cool because, so much of this you think would be developed. And yes, there were some houses around it and they were humongous houses, but as you're going down the road, it's still like it was back in the day with nobody there. You could stand on the porch and not see houses.
I love that.
So that was pretty cool. I did enjoy that tremendously.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I'm glad you got to do that. Maybe we will have to do an episode here in the future and go into a little more detail on Jesse James and that whole place because I think that would be
Oh,
fabulous.
yeah, because they had a video that went into a lot more of it. And my, my daughter is not, you grew up, the James were outlaws. They weren't something to be
I,
idols.
right.
But after seeing the history that they put together, which was really well done, and then the history, what they faced and the conflict in Missouri at that time between the North and the South, and just the factions that came in, it was pretty crazy. And what his mom, I had such respect for Zeralda. Um, she gained a new appreciation for number one, his mom, but what they went through, and I think it slipped a little bit. She's like, well, I sort of understand now why they did the things they did. And I'm like, yay.
And this is
Like,
why
yeah.
it's so important to go visit historical sites and have really good historians on site and volunteers who've studied the whole story and they can tell you all the details. You know, you get so much more out of it than if you just read it from a book. I mean, books are great. Don't get me wrong. I love all the books, but sometimes being there in person and having those experiences just gives you a whole different perspective on how life was, whatever the situation was. So I'm
Right,
glad.
exactly.
And now you got
And
to check
yeah,
something off your bucket list.
yeah. And then it's like, and that's why it's so important when we do this podcast. We tell the stories from, we try to tell the stories from the viewpoint of the time instead of ours today. And it does make a huge difference.
Yes. So speaking of going back in time, which we
Yes.
will do today. So being December and we're going into the Christmas holidays and New Year's and all that, I don't like to do the heaviest of episodes this time of year, uh, partially for our own mental health so that we're not like overwhelmed by like a super sad event or something. But so this today's story is one that I came across, I don't know, forever ago when I was researching something else. And I had read this article. It was a little clipping in a historical newspaper. And I like, on newspapers.com, you can clip things and save them. So I clipped it because I was like, ooh, we're going to have to go back to this and revisit this at some time. But because we haven't done very many of our own episodes this year, we've had so many fun guests. I haven't had a chance to actually really bring this up. So I remembered it and I was like, oh, this was a funny little tidbit. I want to know more about this person. And so I went back, looked up that article, and fortunately, there are tons of newspaper stories. I was able to verify some things. There's some things we're going to talk about that I think are a little apocryphal or a little embellished by this gentleman himself. Because I couldn't verify certain details. So I have a hunch he and his father, who we will talk about as well, very much the storytellers. And I'm pretty sure the adventures they had throughout their life were definitely embellished when they told their own story.
Of
So,
course.
so we're going to start with what attracted my attention to the first place. This particular story was actually printed in newspapers across the country. Like from this gentleman's from New Jersey originally, but this story was printed from the East Coast to the West Coast, the Midwest, everywhere. So I just pulled the one article from Western Newspaper Union, and I forget which state that one was from, but it was the one that was the easiest to read, because sometimes the scanned copies don't read very
yeah,
well.
yeah.
Saturday, November 3rd, 1900, believes in a dream. Samuel Philip Golden of New York City has been warned by 4 dreams that he will die December 31st next, and that his funeral will be held at 2:00 in the afternoon of January 2nd. He implicitly believes the warnings. He is a man of melancholy disposition, but of strong will. For years, however, he has been a victim of a disease which he has spent a small fortune to rid himself of without success. His troubles are rheumatism and Bright's disease. Mr. Golden is a graduate of Cornell University, and when he was a student, he was a fine athlete, 6'2" in height and weighing 208 pounds.
And then in May of 1901, the Freehold transcript of Freehold, New Jersey, writes, Samuel P. Golden of New York, a son of Peter Golden of this place, who on the last day of last year expected to be called to another world, is today the picture of health. At the time of his dream, he was suffering with what was diagnosed as the last stages of Bright's disease. Instead of dying on the day he dreamed he would, he began to improve, and hope finally carried him into health. During his 4 years of invalidism, and until he became too weak, Golden traveled about the country in a wheelchair, giving monologues and recitations. Golden is the brother of William H. Golden of Middletown, and formerly lived at that place.
So he was so insistent. And there was another article, and I didn't include it in our notes, that I read that went into a little bit more detail on his dreams. Somebody expanded on it, but he was so insistent that he was going to die on that day because his dream said so. And then he was quite surprised when he didn't. And he had been suffering from Bright's disease and the rheumatism and things for a while. He'd been sick for a while. So, but he hadn't really, I mean, at that time, there weren't a lot of things to help cure those diseases, although there were plenty of snake oil medicines that claimed to cure such diseases. And in fact, speaking of snake oils, so the Brooklyn Daily Eagle out of Brooklyn, New York, printed on June 18th, 1901, an ad. This was totally an ad. It was listed under the business section. This was an ad. Chronic Bright's disease, chronic rheumatism. Samuel Philip Golden, a New York actor, a sufferer from chronic Bright's disease, and his body distorted from chronic rheumatism, almost miraculously relieved by Buffalo Letha water. The New York Herald of May 23rd published an article headed, Hope gives him health, invalid who expected to die November 31st, 1900, fully recovered. The article refers to the case of Samuel Philip Golden and states that he was suffering from what was diagnosed as the last stages of Bright's disease. He is today a picture of health.
And then, unfortunately, about 6 months later, it seems like things take a different turn. And so, written in the Daily Standard on Saturday, December 6, 1902, of Red Bank, New Jersey, trouble of the Golden family, brother against brother, mother against son. William is charged by Samuel with a threat to kill. Samuel's mother then makes a same charge against him. 2 brothers in Homedale Township, Samuel P. Golden and his brother William, have been at sword points at some time over the division of the family money. I sort of like that, sword points.
I know, I thought that was a cool phrase.
You can see them sort of standing there with their swords. Monday, the difficulties accumulated in the arrest of William at the instigation of Samuel, who charged him with assault and threatening to kill him. William lives on the Golden homestead with his wife, mother, and the former's 3-month-old child. A few weeks ago, Samuel, who is an invalid and has been living in the West, came on and several disagreements between the two men ensued. William is charged with holding a horse pistol at Samuel's head and saying, "Give me $100 or I will blow your brains out." I don't know if he could do that with a. I'm thinking a horse pistol is something that would like start a race.
That's what I was thinking it is.
Okay.
If we're wrong, let us know, listeners. If you know more, I don't know my guns super well. So
Yeah. Or it's as big as a horse. Who knows? Anyway, upon this, Samuel Gordon swore out a warrant before Justice Sickles, which was served by Constable Bergen. Golden gave bonds for his appearance before the grand jury. Another chapter to the Golden arrest was revealed on Tuesday when Mrs. Elizabeth Golden, mother of the two boys, swore out a warrant for Samuel's arrest, charging him with threatening to kill her 2 years ago. At that time, the complainant alleges Samuel chased his mother around the house with a big knife and was only restrained from doing her bodily harm by his brother William, whom he now seeks to have convicted.
So that's crazy. So before we go further into the Golden family troubles, because there are a lot of them between this family, I'm going to take it back a little back to Samuel. So he was born in 1871, and he is, I think, the middle brother. I think William's the oldest, and then it's Samuel, and then there's a younger sister as well, and we'll talk about her a little bit later on. So it was the family of five. They lived on this farmstead, and this farmstead was very old. The Goldens had been in New Jersey since the late 1600s on this particular farmstead. So they were actually extremely proud of this land and this property and everything. However, Samuel and William's father, Peter S. Golden, was just as much of a character as his son Samuel. And I think William might have been a little bit of a character, but I think Samuel was more so. And as we talk more about some of his other dramas in life, he was not afraid to make himself seem like he was bigger than he was. So, and in fact, if we go back to our very first article where we read about his dream, he talks about being a graduate of Cornell. I actually couldn't find any proof that he'd ever gone to Cornell. Maybe he went to Cornell, maybe he attended some classes. Granted, it's not that far from where they're at in New Jersey. So, I mean, it could be a possibility, but I couldn't actually locate anything that said he was there. And that's the only article out of all the articles I looked at that mentions the fact that he went to Cornell. And I thought, well, maybe because Middleton is an older established community. It's been in New Jersey since the 1600s, but it's not a huge one. So I figured, if somebody even back in the late 1890s got accepted to Cornell University, it would be kind of a big deal and they'd write about it in their local papers. Nothing. So I kind of think he made that particular thing up. And Samuel also had a lot of different jobs. So one of his first jobs when he was really an adult, so in his 20s, he ran I think he owned it technically. I think he owned the business, but it was a general store in town. He leased the building that he was doing business out of from somebody else, but it was his general store. And then after that business burned down and kind of failed, he went into business with his father temporarily, where they expanded on the house on their property, and they added like 16 or 18 more rooms or something because they wanted to make it either a boarding house or a hotel. It was a little unclear. So they hired this carpenter, but the thing was they wanted this done really quick, right? Because I think they were trying to do a get rich quick scheme thing. So they wanted this property built really quick, and they were trying to skip corners or whatever. In the end, the carpenter that they hired to do this work ended up suing Samuel and Peter because he didn't get paid what they said they were going to pay him, but then they had countersued saying, well, he didn't do the work he promised, except that they weren't giving him the time to do the work. It was a whole big drawn out case. I read the whole thing. Fortunately, I am glad to say that the carpenter won his case in this instance. And then it was shortly after that it seems like Samuel kind of left town. And he started going other places. He spent some time in Florida. He spent some time in Idaho. I think he was in some other places. And at some point, he does seem to have taken on becoming an actor. So that's why the the one article that mentions monologues and recitations. He'd formed an acting troupe at one point, and he was acting even in his poor health. But I sometimes wonder, as I read through a lot of this, if his health was really that poor, or if he was using it to gain sympathy at times,
Yeah.
you
And then
know.
all of a sudden he's cured, right?
Right. And I kind of feel like, he's a huge part of that ad for the buffalo water. And I mean, it goes into detail about his body was so twisted, he couldn't barely move, and he had to be in the wheelchair, and everybody felt sorry for him. Um, but of course, he didn't want to live that kind of life, and blah blah.
Yeah.
It's hilarious, the whole article. Oh, and actually, I can pull up a picture of it for us. So if you happen to be watching us on YouTube, here is kind of what the article sort of looks like. I cut off the heads of the ladies there, but you can see he's the one who starts out the whole thing. Samuel Philip Golden, a New York actor, has the whole thing. And that just, it went on in the whole half a page of that particular newspaper. And it was, again, like the first article with his dream where he predicted his death, published across the country. And everybody knew who this Samuel Golden was. And he miraculously got better from buffalo water, which
It was a thing back then, all these snake oil and cures and remedies. And yeah.
it totally was. So then eventually, though, he did end up going back to New Jersey. And I'm not entirely sure what made him go back, if he was not doing well financially in some of his other crazy endeavors across the country or whatever. So he went back to the family farm. And I think this next article, I summarized it because it was another very lengthy article about the drama in the family. So that first bit of drama happened shortly after his return in December of 1902. Mm-hmm. And then in in February of 1903, there's more drama between the family.
The Daily Register, Wednesday, February 18th, 1903, Red Bank, New Jersey. Golden family troubles, 2 suits tried in Justice Sickles' court. The Golden family of Red Hill, New Jersey was involved in a series of disputes and lawsuits in 1903. Samuel P. Golden, one of the sons, had returned to the family farm after traveling to the West, and tensions arose between him and his brother William J. Golden and their mother Elizabeth W. Golden. Samuel had his brother William arrested twice, once for allegedly stealing his clothes and again for assault and battery. I was going to say something smart, like he's running down the street naked and his brother's chasing him.
I kind of had that picture too. Or, like there's the scene in, did you ever see the movie Now and Then? It has, it's one of my favorite movies from the 90s. But there's a scene where the boys are swimming naked in the lake and the girls steal their clothes and like take off on their bikes. And the boys are like trying to cover themselves with whatever they can find as they're running after the girls. And that was sort of the picture I had in my head, that his brother like just snuck in and stole all his clothes and took off, and while he was like in the tub or something.
So William and his mother then sued Samuel for damages, claiming he was withholding goods belonging to them. The case went to trial, with Samuel testifying that he had never refused to let William and his mother retrieve their belongings. The jury ultimately ruled in Samuel's favor, finding that William and his mother had no cause for action. The article notes that the family is now split, with Samuel and his father Peter living in the family home, and William, his wife, and his mother are living in Brooklyn.
Now, interestingly enough, with this family home, where it's located, or where it was located originally, so, and I didn't go into a lot of details, but it was on a county line. So half the house or half the property was in one county and half was in the other. And before all of this drama took place, part of the family lived on one side and the other part lived on the other side. And until Samuel came back, like people referred to them as that side and this side and whatever. And they all got along and it all worked out well. But then when the sister, whose married name was McLean, she owned, each of the kids had been given a third of the property, right? And then when Samuel came back, he convinced her to sell him her portion of the property. So now he owned 2/3 of the property. But part of what this all happened with the mother is the mother before she was living with William was living with the sister. And his agreement was if he took on 2/3 of the property, he would make sure to provide his mother a home for the rest of her life. Well, he kind of went back on his word. But I have a hunch there were some hard feelings between him and his mother and his father, because his father in 1879, so when Samuel would have been about 8 years old, ran into this predicament where he was blackmailed or attempted blackmail by a couple of guys who, and I wasn't entirely sure of the reason. Like, I read the entire trial transcript and I still never quite figured out why they were doing what they were doing. But at some point, they took him to New York. They took Peter, the father, to New York, got him really drunk or high or something, because the article says alcohol or drugs. I don't know which. Got him to some brothels. He had a great time. All was great. Then they went back to his wife and told Elizabeth all about this ordeal. Now, of course, Elizabeth's back home in New Jersey with 3 young children, going out of her mind, probably on a farm, wondering where her husband went off to. And they convinced her to file for divorce. And again, I'm not sure why they wanted her to file for divorce, but they convinced her. So eventually, when Peter sobers up, he figures out this whole thing, and then he goes back and he's asking his wife for forgiveness. But I don't think that ever really happened, because they did end up eventually, for sure, separating. I don't know if the divorce was ever finalized, but I know they separated. And from then on, it seems like William and Mom were a team, and Peter and Samuel are a team. And I feel bad because the daughter was kind of in the middle and she was trying to take care of all of them. So it was family drama from the time the boys were little, thanks to these wackos who decided to do whatever they did. I don't know if there was some payback against Peter. Now, Peter himself apparently had plenty of adventures. They're referred to often. I don't know what they all were, but he was quite the storyteller. And several articles I read about him talked about how charming and handsome he was and blah, 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 blah. So there's a chance he wronged those guys and this was their payback. I just wasn't quite sure what that was. But this is why I think the drama as the boys became men really escalated later on down the road. And somehow in all of this debacle, Samuel ended up with William's portion of the property as well. So at some point, Samuel owned the entire property, and William didn't have his portion and the sister didn't have her portion. He owned it all. And I put in parentheses under that thing, this was directly from the article. So that was my summarization of the much longer article. But Will and his mother refused to leave. They went back to the house. Will's persistency in remaining in the house made Sam mad, and a series of law troubles began. On November 8th, Sam had Will arrested on a charge of stealing his clothes. A month or so later, he had Will arrested again, this time on a charge of assault and battery. And they went through the whole thing. They demanded, so they went back to the house. They demanded admission, but Sam was very emphatically declared that they shouldn't get inside, Will and his mother. The next morning, Will and his mother returned to the house. Mrs. Golden found that one of the windows had not been nailed up, and she undertook to gain an entrance to the house by that window. She started to raise the window, whereupon, according to her story, Sam suddenly appeared with an axe and threatened to brain her or anybody else who attempted to get in the house. I just liked the phrase "to brain her."
Yeah.
It's gross, but like, again,
it paints a very vivid picture.
Right?
And then following, it looks like 2 months later, the Daily Standard on Saturday, April 11th, 1903, in Red Bank, New Jersey. Samuel P. Golden dies on Saturday. Was member of the famous, or maybe infamous, Middleton family. He predicted his own death a few years ago and outlived expectations. His checkered career in many states passed away at the homestead. Samuel Phillips Golden, a member of the Golden family of Red Hill near Middletown, died at the Golden homestead last Saturday morning. His death was due to consumption. which he had been a sufferer for many years. He was 32 years old. Mr. Golden was the son of Peter Schneck Golden. I hope I said that right. Who
I
now
think
resides
so.
in Middleton. Owing to unpleasant family relations, Peter S. Golden has not lived at the homestead for several years. Since Mr. Golden left home, he has done considerable traveling, but lately has been stopping at Freehold. Samuel P. Golden was born and brought up on the family farm. The original farmhouse was built by Golden, who came from England in 1700s, and the Goldens greatly prized the homestead on account of its family associations. Samuel, about 12 years ago, kept a general store, which is what Jenny had mentioned, in Middletown, which was burned down. Shortly after this, he went away. His health failed him, and through sanatoriums in different sections of the country, he sought relief, but the benefit was only temporary. On one occasion, he went to Florida for his health and started a small cigar store. He borrowed the money to pay for the business. Shortly after, he sold out his business and making a good profit on the deal. He then went to Hot Springs, Arkansas. It makes you wonder what was going on in Hot Springs, Arkansas, that somebody like him would try to maybe make some money or something. He next wandered to the west, reaching Idaho. There he became interested in the manufacturing of bed springs. Subsequently, he organized a theatrical company and was one of the actors. Mr. Golden's health was not benefited by the change of climate and the Bright's disease, which is a disease of the kidneys.
Yes.
Developed, and his sickness resulted finally in consumption. He failed to a mere skeleton from a man of fine physique. In his prime, he weighed about 180 pounds and was 6 feet tall. In those days, he dressed nicely, and he was a fine specimen of physical manhood.
That is my favorite description ever.
Several years ago, he returned home. It was then a number of lawsuits began between him and his brother William. Later, William left the farm, and Samuel was left in possession of the homestead. So shortly after, he sent for his father. The old man nursed his son faithfully until he died. Samuel, a few years ago, had a succession of dreams, which we had mentioned earlier, that he would die on the last day of December of that year. He made all the preparations for the event, but the dreams failed to come true. During the last session of the grand jury, Samuel and his brother William and all the other members of the family appeared to get each other indicted. It's like, no, you're indicted. No, you're indicted.
Right.
However, no indictments were found against any one of them. The funeral for Samuel was held Tuesday afternoon at the home of his sister, Mrs. Calvin McLean. Reverend T.A. Beekman, pastor of the Reformed Church of Red Bank, was officiating. The interment made was at Fairview Cemetery.
So this man, Samuel, quite the character. And like I said, that description of him being the, what was it? The fine specimen of physical manhood. Best description I think I've ever read in any obituary. It just, I had to read that one out loud to Dave, and then I had to read it to Charlie when he walked into the room later. I was like, that's hilarious to me that that's how they described him in his obituary. So real quick, we're going to take it back to his first real job again, which was the general store that he owned. And there was an article shortly after the fire, like they wrote about it the day after it happened. So the Daily Register, Wednesday, August 20th, 1890, Red Bank, New Jersey, Samuel P. Golden burned out and the building destroyed. Edward Taylor also burned out, the loss about $6,500 with $4,575 in insurance. A devastating fire occurred in Middleton on Monday night, destroying a brick store owned by Henry C. Taylor and occupied by Samuel P. Golden as a general country store. The adjacent frame building, a butcher shop owned by Edward Taylor, was also destroyed. The fire was discovered around 11:30 p.m., and despite efforts to save the buildings, they were completely destroyed. The cause of the fire is unknown, but it's noted that a small fire had been discovered in the cellar on July 19th, but was quickly extinguished. The store was insured for $3,075, and the owner, Henry C. Taylor, is undecided whether to rebuild. Samuel P. Golden, the store's occupant since April, is eager to resume business and is exploring temporary locations. So this is my thought. There was already one little fire that got put out. Then there was the bigger fire. Samuel was the last person to be in the building before either of these fires broke out. And of course, that second one, he made sure nobody was there. I'm wondering if he really didn't like being in the general store business. He figured we'll get the insurance and I'll move on. I wouldn't put it past him, and maybe even with help from his father, to have burnt that building down on its own. Now, I shouldn't say that not knowing anything for sure. You know, they never did actually find an official cause for the fire. So it could have been completely accidental. There were plenty of things at that time that were very flammable, and depending on how they were stored, it legitimately could have just burned up. But knowing that all these other little businesses and enterprises he started after that all over the place, it makes me suspect that maybe this fire wasn't as accidental as it appeared.
Well, and it was not uncommon for insurance fires to take place.
Right.
And since Samuel was the epitome of an upstanding citizen, I think what you're thinking is probably very plausible.
He was quite able to charm his way in any situation. And of course, back then, they didn't necessarily have the technology that they have today when there's a fire that, a lot of times they go in and they inspect after a fire and they can figure out if it was arson or if it was accidental and what started it and how it started. They've learned how to do that. They've studied that for years and years and years now. But at this time, they didn't. And if there was any suspicion that it was started on purpose, it was never said. I just, in my own mind, as I was putting Samuel's story together, I was like, I wouldn't be surprised if he decided after 5 months that, this isn't the business for me. Let's get out of it. And then, of course, they went and tried to swindle that architect or the carpenter a little bit later. So, and then he left town for quite some time. So, just whatever.
Yeah, goodness knows, what he was doing in other places that didn't make it to the newspaper. So that makes sense.
And then going back to Fairview Cemetery real quick. So Fairview Cemetery is where Samuel was buried after he died in 1903. I was trying to find more information on the cemetery itself, and I was having a hard time. There was supposed to be a video, like a 4-minute long video that was about the history of the cemetery. But when I clicked on the link, it didn't take me to a video link. And all of this is through the city of Middleton, through their website, and I couldn't find it. So this was just off of the city of Middleton's website. The cemetery itself is located just off of State Highway 35 in the Oak Hill section of Middleton. The cemetery was founded in the early part of the 19th century. Several Civil War soldiers and generals are buried in the family grave sites. There is also a veterans memorial dedicated to residents who served the United States as members of the armed forces. And I don't have the picture to show, but there is a lovely photo online, a couple of them, of that particular monument. But yes, Fairview looks like a gorgeous cemetery, as you can see behind Dianne, if you are looking at it on YouTube with us. And actually, I have another photo.
Yeah, I was pull up the church one.
Oh, you want to pull that one up? And then while you're pulling up that one, I'll actually pull up the one image of Samuel that we have, or that I was able to find. And here's the thing, since Samuel was never married and never had any children, and as far as I know, his brother only had the one child, so I don't know that there's any descendants left who can verify some of these stories. And so when I was looking for stuff online,
yeah, I can't get the picture that changed.
Well, here's the one of the church or the chapel that's at the cemetery. I'll move my head out of the way. And I thought this was just gorgeous because now we're sitting in winter and it looks like there's a Christmas wreath on the door, but it's a beautiful little stone chapel that has that sort of Gothic look to it that was so popular at the time. And you can see that there's lots of trees in the cemetery, and even the picture behind Dianne, which is obviously in the spring, you see all the trees and there's things that are blooming and it's gorgeous.
It is a
Um,
very pretty little cemetery.
yes, so it's actually a beautiful spot to be laid to rest, and it was started probably around the time that the garden cemetery movement was really getting going, which would make sense there. And let me switch back real quick. I will go back to our picture of Mr. Samuel P. Golden. So this is the drawing that is included with the article that's all about his dream
Hmm.
and how he was planning to die in a few days. He's not bad looking. I mean, they made him look quite handsome in that photo or that drawing, the rendering. Now, whether that's his true likeness or not, I have no idea. But that was the only image I could find of him. So there he is. And I will, of course, make sure these photos are posted to our social medias too for those listeners that don't check us out on YouTube. But that's kind of what he looked like. So for the time period, he's got the mustache going on, he's got the nice, high, stiff collar. He looks like a handsome man or a fine specimen of manhood, whatever it was in his obituary.
Fine specimen of manhood.
That's still going to be my favorite thing ever. But definitely, I think a little bit of a con artist. I really do.
But then, even after all that, after the family homestead, as they called it, was such an important part for the family, it was.
I should mention before you go
Okay.
into this part, because I
Yeah.
didn't put it on here. After Samuel died, of course, he owned the whole farmstead at that point. He owned
Right.
all three portions. He left everything to his father in his will. So his brother and his sister and his mother, nothing. It all went back to his father. And that's important for what's coming up next.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes,
So
sorry. I forgot to
no,
put
I'm
that in
glad
there
you
because that's an
explained that
important part of the
because it was,
story.
yeah. Yeah, it was like you had to have that part. So listed in the Daily Register on Wednesday, March 16th, 1904, Red Bank, New Jersey, selling farmland in plots. The big profit being made in the Peter S. Golden place. The Peter Golden Farm near Middletown is being sold off in tracts to farmers living in the vicinity. Gosh, at an average of $60 an acre.
I know.
Be interesting to see what that is equivalent to today.
Yeah, I didn't do the math conversion on that one, but
$60 an acre then might have been probably was quite a bit.
I don't know. I still think they were getting a pretty good bargain for it, though.
So Charles Allen had bought 25 acres, Joseph Brown 4 acres, Michael Toomey and James Brown 6 acres each. I love how they do this. John Toomey 10 acres and Garrett Loyster a small strip adjoining his own place. The property was recently sold at a sheriff's sale for $5,100. It was bought by parties in Somerset County who will clear about $6,000 on the deal. Peter Golden died of stomach cancer in December of 1906.
So yeah, he died 3 years after his son. But it's my understanding that after Samuel left the property to Peter, which it had been Peter's initially before Peter broke it up among his children.
Yeah.
It had belonged to him because it had been bequeathed to him by his father and his grandfather and his great grandfather had gone down through the line. But Peter does not seem to have been very good with handling money and finances, and he wasn't paying the taxes on the property after Samuel died. So in the end, the county got all of that property, and then they sold it at auction at the sheriff's sale. So the Somerset County people, which there was a name, I was looking for that name, William V. Still of Somerville, purchased it, and he was able to get the entire property, all of the acreage. And I don't know what the total acreage actually was, but he got it all for $5,100, which was a bargain. And then, of course, he sold it off piece by piece. And as that article that Dianne just read stated, he was going to make about $6,000 in profit after selling it all out. But the really interesting thing about the article about the original sale was it did go into a little bit more history on the property itself. So the Golden Farm had been in the possession of the Golden family from 1701 up until last Thursday, which was
1904.
in 1904. So this article was written Monday, January 25th, 1904. The Golden family originally came from England. One member of that family settled at Gravesend, Long Island, about 1680. In 1701, he moved to what was then Middleton Township and bought the farm. He died about 1750 and bequeathed the farm, together with considerable other property, to his son Elias. Elias, this reminds me of reading the first part of the Bible when so and so begot so and so begot so and so. I was having flashbacks. He died about 1750 and bequeathed the farm together with considerable other property to his son Elias. Elias died about the beginning of 1800 and left the farm to his son John. John in turn died and left the place to his son Peter S. Golden. And Peter S. Golden was born in 1838, and his life has been a checkered one, as was his son's. And so, yes, it's my understanding from going into some other details that he was not good with the money and the finances, sadly, because if he had been, and if Samuel and William had been in turn, that family property might still be family property today, but it's not. And so it's kind of sad, but it was just a fun little story. And yes, he did die in 1906. Peter is buried in a different cemetery, and I didn't record it in the notes what cemetery he's in. So I think Samuel is in Fairview by himself in his grave. And unfortunately, his grave, if it's marked, there's no photographs of it right now available online. So I don't, but it may not even be marked. I don't know.
Yes,
I mean, I found
imagine he would be buried with even near his brother or his mother. And
yeah, and I didn't go back and look to see where they ended up in the ends of their life, but I feel like Peter and Samuel instigated a lot of what happened within the family. And in fact, one of the other articles that was written either right before or right after Samuel died, and I don't remember now which, was talking about one of the court cases. And they mentioned how William was a handsome man and he was very nice, just a little, I forgot what the term was, but they were kind of saying he didn't have nearly the backbone that his brother had, you know. And then they talked about his wife being a very nice lady and blah, 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 blah. It was just kind of funny the way they described him, but it was kind of like whoever wrote the article, like I said, I kind of think it was written maybe right after Samuel died, was like, okay, now we can give these guys a chance again. But until Samuel came back, like William was never in any trouble. He wasn't in and out of the courts. It wasn't until his brother came back and stirred things up that they were in and out of court. And Samuel himself had been in court from the time he was about 19 or 20, because there was another case where he was accused of something. And I didn't go back and I tried to go back and find that article after I started doing the research, and then I never did find it again. But it had mentioned because he'd never been in trouble with the law before, they just kind of gave him a fine and sent him on his way type thing. But that he was, like I said, 19 or 20 at that point. So he was a younger man. Not that he was very old when he died. 32 is not old, but
no, it's not. But I wonder what he would be classified or determined today. Because it sounded like there was some kind of something that just wasn't quite screwed in right.
Yeah.
Put it like,
well, and I wonder, since he suffered from Bright's disease, and since his father obviously could be enticed with alcohol, maybe they were alcoholics. Maybe they drank a lot. That'll affect your kidneys and your livers too. I don't know. Again, nothing ever said that. So it's all speculation at this point on what his story was. But I just found that very first article about his predicting his own death so interesting. And then I was like, if you have an article that gets written about you that gets printed from coast to coast, there's got to be more information on you.
Yeah, there's got to be more, a story behind the story.
Yes. So it was one of those, we always say every death had a life and every life had a story. And that's one of those stories that I just wanted to find out more about. And I found out what I could. Again, there's a lot of things that I couldn't verify that I wanted to, but if there are records for him, they're not digitized. But I also have a feeling some things were embellished by both Samuel and his father when talking about each other or talking about their own lives. And even in the drawing that's behind me right now, the rendition of him, there's a little twinkle in those eyes that makes you suspect that he knows what's going on, and he's going to pull the wool over somebody's eyes,
Yeah.
and he's not going to feel guilty for doing it.
Well, and just think if you hadn't come across a story, Samuel's story, Samuel and his story may have been forgotten for, he died, what, early 1900s? So almost over
1903.
120 years.
Yeah. So it was kind of fun to share his story and try
Yeah,
and find out more about him.
definitely.
And like I said, he himself never had children. I know there was a niece. I don't know if she lived to adulthood because every time she's mentioned in all these articles, she's still a young child or an infant.
Mm.
And I don't know if the sister had any children. That was one thing. And I'll be honest, I didn't go back and research all of that because I was so interested in him and his father in this case. So there may be descendants who maybe know the stories more, and maybe there's stories that weren't published in the paper that have been handed down through the family,
Oh, yeah,
which I think
definitely.
would be so fun to hear about. The other thing I found out, though, when I was doing my research on Fairview Cemetery in particular, and like I said, I wanted to find out more so we could talk about where he's buried. I did find out that Middleton, because it's one of the oldest settlements in New Jersey, has a ton of cemeteries that were once on like private property, family properties, whatever, that have kind of gone to seed, are crumbling, falling apart. And so they have actually started an adopt a cemetery program. And they have through their town's website, there is a list of cemeteries that they
That's
want to
really
start,
cool.
that they're starting with. They're calling those particular ones the abandoned cemeteries, and they had abandoned in quotes. So, and they have a whole thing set up. And so I think we're going to do a future episode on that because I'd really like to explore that more. And I didn't look into it a whole lot while I was researching this
Oh
story.
no, you couldn't have. You would have went down the rabbit hole and you
I
wouldn't have
know.
seen. So
But
yeah,
I love the idea of adopting a cemetery and
yeah,
trying to clean it
definitely.
up and preserve it and record what you can find of the stories there. So uh, kudos to Middleton and their historic district who really working to try and make this a thing because this is a more recent institution that they're forming that I noticed on their, like I said, on their website. And so I thought it was really cool. And yes, I will definitely go down that rabbit hole. I just didn't for this episode.
But no, I think it sounds like a rabbit hole definitely worth pursuing.
For sure. And real quick before we let you guys go for tonight, just a reminder if you are interested, again, thank you to those of you who have purchased
Yeah, thank
the
you.
cemetery merch. We're so excited. And I also have to give a shout out. We have had one listener, he got his t shirt and he did send us a picture. I haven't posted it to social media yet. I promise I will get it up there. I was so, thank you, Ken. It was such a fun. He actually put the t-shirt on his skeleton and took a picture of the skeleton with his tea table and our t-shirt. And I think that's
Oh,
fabulous.
that's so cool. Thank you.
So thank you, Ken, for the photo. And I will get that posted to our social media. I just haven't yet. I'm just this week getting back into my swing of trying to be more regular again. I let myself take pretty much all last week off, other than our little happy Thanksgiving message on Thursday. I was like,
Uh-huh.
sometimes you have to
So funny.
unplug from
Yeah.
everything, including the social media. And so, but yes, if you're interested, you can go on our website. There's a link that says store. You click on that, it will take you to our store where you can purchase the t-shirts, the hoodies, the mugs, the water bottles, stickers. So all of those things are
Yep.
there. And we are going to get the tea. I know we've said it a couple times, but we are going to get that added to the Etsy shop so that you can order the sample sizes through that. And after Christmas, well, after the holidays, we will be developing some new tea flavors for you. So stay tuned for that for our tea lovers who love drinking tea. I'm having my tea tonight. It is not our cemetery story tea, only because I drank all of mine already. So it's just mint tea tonight. But
I took mine to on our trip just so I could
did
have a
you?
bit of caffeine. And I really, I hate to say I didn't try it until then, but I really liked it. Does have, if you like it, a sweeter tea, it definitely will need to add sweetener, but it's just, I drank it in the, when did I drink it? Afternoon to just give that little bit of energy without being all spazzy the rest
Right.
of the day. And it was just enough to keep me alive while I was out there.
Yeah, the sweetener, so it depends on the tea that I'm drinking, but I think our cemetery story tea, because it's got the cinnamon
Hmm.
flavors in it and the cocoa flavors, it needs that little bit of honey or the sugar or whatever your preferred sweetener is
It's
to
earthy.
help.
It's really earthy.
Right. It brings out those flavors more. That was something I learned a long time ago about teas, especially herbal teas, but certain other teas. Some of them do need the sweetener to really bring out the flavor, of whatever the flavor
Right.
is. So I thought when I tried ours for the first time, I think the first time I drank it, I didn't add sweetener. And then the second time I was like, let me just try it with a little bit of sweetener because I don't usually sweeten a lot of my drinks. And so I liked it better. So if you have ordered it and you're drinking it and you haven't tried sweetening it, try
Try it.
sweetening it because it does bring out a different quality of the flavor that is good either way, but I like it a little sweeter in this case.
I might have to try that the next time I have some. Is
Yeah. So yeah, I would have had that tonight, but I I drank it all. And I need to order myself some more. So
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
do that. So yes, thank you. If you, like I said, if you're interested, go onto our website and click the store link and you can purchase anything. And then if you want to, you do not have to, but we would love to, especially if you purchase one of the hoodies or the t-shirt, or if you even purchase a mug or something, send us a picture of you wearing it or using it. We would love to see that. And
Yeah, it's definitely. It took us 4 years to get the merch going, and now we want to see people enjoying it. We thank you for taking time to join us today for this ordinary, extraordinary chat. To learn more about today's discussion, please visit our website, theordinaryextraordinarycemetery.com, where you will find additional links in our show notes. And if you're watching us on YouTube, be sure to give us a like and subscribe to our channel, The Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery Podcast. This really makes us more visible to others on YouTube who may also enjoy our podcast.
And please don't forget to visit us on social media, where we share all kinds of cemetery photos, quotes, tidbits, and more. We are on Facebook and Instagram at Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery, and on X at OrdExtraCem. So OrdExtraCem. If you enjoyed this or any of our episodes, please consider leaving a 5-star review and a comment on Apple's podcast, Spotify, or directly on our website. You can also leave those same comments on YouTube. Your positive reviews and enthusiasm for our show help others who love cemeteries and history to discover us and all of our ordinary, extraordinary stories. And if you're feeling extra generous and want to help support the podcast in a financial way, you can now buy Diane and I a cup of coffee, either through YouTube or on our website. Simply click on the coffee cup icon and it will allow you to make a donation.
Until we meet again.